In the United States, the history of slavery and its aftermath has long been tied to the question of reparations. To understand why reparations are necessary, we must first look at the legacy of slavery that has shaped our country. Slavery began in the early 17th century, with the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in Virginia in 1619. While early labor systems varied, it wasn't long before racialized chattel slavery became entrenched, particularly in the southern colonies. Southern agriculture relied heavily on cash crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton. Enslaved labor fueled the wealth of plantation owners and contributed to the overall economic growth of the nation. As slavery expanded, so did laws to enforce it. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, slave codes were enacted, legally defining enslaved people's status, denying them rights, and justifying their brutal treatment. Despite this, abolitionist movements arose. The Civil War, fought from 1861 to 1865, centered on the issue of slavery and states' rights. The war ended with the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, freeing enslaved people, and the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. However, emancipation didn't mean true freedom. Many freed individuals faced overwhelming challenges: poverty, lack of education, and limited opportunities to build wealth. After the Civil War, the Reconstruction era aimed to integrate formerly enslaved people into society. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to provide land, education, and assistance to Black Americans. But the end of Reconstruction led to the rise of Jim Crow laws, racial segregation and disenfranchisement that was enforced by white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Despite being free, many Black Americans became sharecroppers, working land they didn't own in a system that kept them in perpetual debt and poverty. Discriminatory practices continued. The GI Bill after World War II, for example, excluded Black veterans from housing benefits, widening the racial wealth gap. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s sought to dismantle systemic racism and secure equal rights for Black Americans. Major victories like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were hard-won. Yet systemic disparities persist today. Inequities in wealth, healthcare, education, and criminal justice continue to disproportionately affect Black Americans. Advocates for reparations argue that acknowledging the historical legacy of slavery is crucial in understanding the systemic disadvantages that Black Americans face today. Reparations are seen as a moral and ethical response, an attempt to heal the scars left by slavery and its aftermath, and to address the lingering effects of racial injustice. By recognizing the historical context and acknowledging the ongoing effects of slavery, we can take meaningful steps toward justice. Reparations are not just about compensation, they are about healing, reconciliation, and the pursuit of true equity for all Americans. The legacy of slavery is ongoing. The fight for reparations continues. Join the conversation, educate yourself and others. Together we can work toward a future of justice and equity.